ball, of course, at a very young age, but then ended up going to, is it Chabot Junior College? Chabot Junior College, and then later played at Sonoma State University. Tell me, if you would, I know son of a coach, tell me about some of those experiences and how that got you to a point where maybe those turning points where ultimately you ended up, I know you spent some time in the tech world and sales, but ultimately came to this point where you started into, mental performance coaching and sports psychology.
Yeah, I'll try to give you the cliff notes because it could be a long story. I'll start though as an athlete, as a kid. I was blessed. I believe that we're all in a similar age, and so, when we were growing up and competing and loving the sports that we played, there was no specialization that was going on. So I had the chance to play baseball and basketball and soccer and football and track and get into musical instruments. So there was a lot of stuff that I had the opportunity to get experience in. However, as I was going through my life, I just felt something connected to football. I felt like the leadership skills, and I had a good arm, and the game itself just raised my frequency. So I became this quarterback for 13 years. And the interesting thing how I got into being a mental performance coach is that my sophomore year at Chabot Junior College, I got hit. And I know it was the game I got hit. I just can't remember the exact hit. Because there was a few of them that happened in a game. So one of them I got spun in the air, but I think that might have been it. But what had happened was that the following week, we did this really funky stretch that we were doing warm-ups before practice, and my hip popped. And it was but it felt like it needed to be popped for days after the game. And so when it popped, I was like, whoa, what happened? And and it started to get the pain was getting bigger and bigger throughout practice. And then I woke up the next morning going, and it was a Wednesday, and I'm like, how am I going to do this? How am I going to play this Saturday? And so I fought practice Thursday. I mean, I was coaches even went up to me, he's like, why are you hobbling? I'm like, I have no clue. And I didn't really want to tell him what was going on. I said, it's just something kind of funky, but I'm okay. And then Friday was just, it was easy practice. It was, shells and shorts. And so it was still sore, but I don't know. I woke up that Saturday and it went away. I'm like, wow, that pain I had for 3 days and it went away. And then it kind of came in and out. So that hip, man, when I went to Sonoma State, it was there the whole time. And then by the end of that last season, my junior season, my shoulder was done. I had to redo that. And my hip was clicking. And so, fast forwarding, I spent 17 years after that decision to move on from football in pain and depression and frustration. My identity was challenged because I was so pissed off that my body was breaking down from the sport I loved. But I didn't I didn't have the chance to say I'm leaving the game of football. My body was like, no, you can't do it anymore. And so that was frustrating. And I didn't do the inner work for a long time. And so as I moved throughout my life for almost 2 decades, my hip got worse and worse and worse. My gait, my walk, my spine got turned gently on the front end of this whole story. And then, man, when I was 36, I was getting a hip replacement. I was like, holy smokes, I'm getting a hip replacement, 36. And then what had happened is that my hip, it was fine, the operation, but my body just reacted to it negatively. And this little small bone in the middle of my hip started to grow. Every 30 days, it was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And there was, at the end of 4 years, the bone grew 6 inches long and 4 inches wide. And it grew all the way from my hip flexor all the way into my butt. So that left, I thought the very first 15 years, 14 years were tough. Those next 4 were devastating, where I really lost my I couldn't talk about football. I couldn't tell you that I was an athlete. My wife had to tie my shoes and clip my toenails for about 3.5 years. Because of the way I overcompensated, my spine was really bent in 3 different spots. It was tough. I had a really hard time. I just wanted to be normal. I just wanted to get back to Grant. And so which was really crazy because when I finally got to a point where my doctor found the secret sauce, he calls me up one night and says, "Hey man, like I found it. Like I talked to a doctor in Europe, but it's kind of crazy stuff. We got to put radiation in your hip. We got to cut out the bone. We potentially have to remove some of your butt." And I'm sitting there going, "Whoa, like I didn't sign up for this, but yeah, let's do it." So this is just the neat part of the story, because when you think about doctors, especially orthopedics, they're not there to be psychologists. They're not there to like, touch your heart. They're in and out. They just get in and get out. This guy was with me for like 4 years. And so we built a relationship, and he was like, he saw my pain. He saw what, like, it was destroying the spirit of me. So when he gave me the news and I told him, let's go for it, he said, "I knew you were going to say that, but what I want you to do is just get ready for this next surgery. Like, no pun intended. I want you to come out of this surgery running, like, into life. So spend 6 to 8 months, 9 months, losing your weight, getting mentally prepared, spiritually prepared, everything prepared." So I was like, at that moment, I was like, "Oh my, here it is." Like, so I lost my weight. I got into meditation. I got a breathing practice going on. I was being very intentional with my diet. And I'll tell you what, when I got out of that second surgery, and mind you, I had 2 hip replacements before I was 40. So to me, it's just crazy. But
I was just going to add there, Grant, and the doctor had told you way back at the beginning of this thing is be ready to spend a lifetime being disabled. Like, I mean, you were at that point where they were literally, it was, that was what was facing you to begin with prior to this last surgery. Yeah.
Yeah. He said, get used to being handicapped.
Handicapped. That's right.
What? I remember telling my dad that, and he's like, "You're not handicapped. No, you're not." And then it got to a point after a year and a half, I was like, all right, well, I am handicapped. And they said for the rest of my life, this could be my reality. So I was sick of fighting it. I had to accept it. So that was tough. And I keep my placard around all the time. It's in my car because it reminds me of my journey and all the shit I had to go through mentally. And man, it was tough, man. But man, when I came out of that second surgery, it was unreal. Like, I felt like I was in heaven. Like the way that the nurses were talking to me and saying my name, it sounded like just like music, and everything was soft. The colors were just very gentle. And I was sitting there, and as I was like kind of like coming back to the present from being under, I just said out loud, I'm like, "I'm back." And they had no clue. Like about my surgery or about my journey.
Wow.
So and I remember getting back by myself, sitting there going, "I'm back." Like I felt it. And when I went to go to the bathroom, and not to give you and your listeners an image at all, but when I went to the bathroom for the first time, it had been since I left the game of football where I could sit down with both of my legs straight, bent perfectly on a toilet. And so when I sat down for the first time, I was like, "Oh my." And then I told the nurse, I'm like, "Can I sit up and down like a couple of times? Like, can you hold me?" And it was just to feel myself get up and down. I was like, holy shit. I'm like, it's the little things in life. And it was so like, I was like, and then I went back to my bed. I'm like, "Yep, I'm back. Like, I'm fine. I'm back." And so that was at that moment where it was just so much clarity, but it wasn't until like a year and a half later where I was like, all right, I got to do something different with my life. And I want to play a bigger game. Like, I don't want to play a small, narrow game anymore. So I want to play a big game. And I was sitting there in my car between sales calls, and I was listening to Desmond Howard talk about a sports psychologist. And I was like, "Wait, what? What is that?" And I literally went home, and I did all this research, realized that it was a thing. And I was in school within about 2 months of that experience. And then here I am.
That's unbelievable. I'm so glad you unpacked that story, because when I was reading it in the book, I was just like, oh my, like, because you mentioned in the prologue, and then like it's a while into the book before you tell the story. And I remember like reading it in the prologue, and I was like, wow, I wonder what happened, and then eventually you get into it, and it was just like, oh my gosh, that's incredible. When you start talking about how your spine was shifting because of the way you had to change your gait and everything else. So really incredible. So as you started to work with athletes, as you started to work with these clients, when was that decision to write a book like Next One Up Mindset? What was the catalyst for that?
It's so funny when you think about my book and my podcast, and even the small amount of blogs that I do. When I was in my grad program, I remember my professor going, okay, who is going to have a podcast? And everyone raised their hand. And I'm sitting there going, I'm not going to do a podcast. I don't even know what a podcast is, right? And then they're like, well, who's going to write a book? And there's people raising their hands. And I'm like, there's no way that seems daunting. And they were talking about, what about blogging and all the videos? And I'm sitting there going, I just want to work with athletes. I just want to connect and be with them. And so I resisted all of that. And then it got to the very end. My podcast became my project. Instead of doing a thesis, I did a podcast. And then here I am, almost 5 years later, I have my podcast. So to go back to your question with the book, I've always, as I got into my profession and I just started to, because I was doing a ton of reading, I was connecting to the idea of writing a book. So I just started writing all these thoughts down, writing all these strategies and being creative with. I just started to just kind of document and journal my thoughts, and it led me to, I'm like, you know what? My whole life as an athlete, as a corporate athlete, as a coach, I had just been always fascinated of the next man up or the next one up, and I always was like, oh, look at the people that actually do the right things. Right. Even when they don't even they're second stringers. I always say this, second string and third stringers are the most important people in a team. Now your first strings are vital. You have to have it, but your second and third string, man, if they're not prepared to get to go into the rhythm of the game, I mean, things can screw things up. So I don't know. I was just so fascinated to see how people got prepared for the unknown, especially the people that were second string and third stringers. And then I was fascinated by people that got their number called and they got, their pants are down, right? Not only did they destroy that opportunity, but they destroyed their career. So I wanted to kind of highlight these stories and then plug in the way that I would coach and teach people with my strategies from a mental skills perspective. So I figured, bringing all these incredible stories and my own personal journey and my strategies, it just came together. I'm like, okay, this is time to do it, and I'm ready to write it.
Yeah, it takes a special kind of attitude for somebody who's in that second string or third string in the in that depth chart, because some decide to just sulk, and just that's it's just is what it is. I'm just not, they accept it. Others work while they wait, right? Others are there. They're putting in the work. They're getting the mental reps. They're taking advantage of every single thing. And when your number's called, man, like you said, you got to be ready. And some of them are and some of them aren't. And you do a great job in the book of sharing some examples of people who were ready and sometimes even didn't know, looking for helmets, on the sidelines. It's like all those things, which I thought was really funny. One of the great stories in my neck of the woods, I live in Virginia, is at the University of Virginia. They had a player by the name of Thomas Woodruff who was a, freshman year, maybe got a few at-bats, sophomore year, a few at-bats or whatever. And he goes basically through his whole career at University of Virginia and doesn't really get to play until the College World Series in 2015. And he is in the starting lineup now. All of a sudden, he's going to have to play, and just goes in and just has just an amazing game, ends up getting MVP, and just a really, really big part of them winning the national title. And it's all because he chose that mindset. And every single person on that team, when you ask them about Thomas Woodruff, always says he was the hardest worker. He showed up to the park every day as if he was not just the number one guy on the depth chart, but the captain of the team, like that kind of a work ethic and attitude about it. And it makes such a huge difference. So,
well, and Grant, I think you even talk about how your separation is your preparation, right? What you do is the difference in how you do.
Big time, and I love that phrase. When you think about when you're prepared,